Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Joey Kaufman and Rob Oller from the Columbus Dispatch.
Welcome back to the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Rob Oller. Ohio State football is deep into the offseason. Players are reporting for strength and conditioning workouts. Recruiting visits are happening. But the topic that is on, I think, a lot of people's minds in college sports during spring meetings and talk radio shows and column inches is playoff expansion. The Big Ten is discussed and pushed for a 24-team playoff, which, if adopted by the conferences, could be in effect in 2027. So, as the topic and potential for expansion from 12 to 24 teams gain some traction, Rob, I thought we could discuss what this ultimately could mean if it comes to pass and for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the further professionalism or the NFLism of college football. We could cut this podcast really short and just say it's about money, because that's what it is, as most things are in these situations. But how it plays out, and specifically at Ohio State, is I think you and I would agree that if they go to 24 teams, unless they drop back to the Luke Fickell interim season or some of the John Cooper years, which don't foresee happening, never say never, they're going to make it in every year. In fact, they'll make it in with 3 losses. I mean, brand matters. And Ohio State with 3 losses. Well, shoot, some people say they can make it in with 3 losses this year. So if they go to 24, I guess it's not beyond the realm of possibility that they'd make the playoff with 4 losses. I don't know. Maybe that's a reach, but in terms of just what it does to the regular season, what are your thoughts?
I think if the 2014 playoffs adopted, Ohio State is probably done ever playing a meaningful regular season game again in terms of the ultimately selection for the playoff. Because you look at the BCS college football playoff era, there are only 4 times in which it's ended a season unranked. It was unranked at the end of the 99, 2000, 2001 season. So late stage John Cooper, Jim Tressel's first year. And then 2011, they were unranked. Even 2004, which was a rebuilding year under Tressel, they were 8-4, but finished 20th in the final AP poll. So that's a season in which they probably still make it. To me, that would be, I think, the biggest change for Ohio State if this does come to pass. I think you look at this upcoming 26th season for the Buckeyes. You look at that Texas game in week 2, okay, they need to win that. And you figure they could lose 2 games and make the playoff. 3 is cutting it close. 4, you're for sure done. I think it's so hard to fathom Ohio State dropping much worse than 9-3, 8-4 in a season, the way the schedule just works out for them typically. So that to me would just be a drastic change. I think it would end up being the season most of the time you're competing, you almost would have to view the regular season as a singular event. Do you want to win the Big Ten? Do you want to have a Big Ten championship banner, acknowledgement, ring, or do you want to have the Michigan game? It would sort of create a separate entity unto itself, because you're not really viewing the regular season as a qualification metric for the postseason, because it's going to be a foregone conclusion for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, you know what? That's an interesting concept. You're saying they would schedule it even easier. You wouldn't have Texas, or to get fans and keep fans in the seats. They would still schedule the big schools, knowing that if you lost the game, you're still in the playoff. I guess it could go either way. You're saying they wouldn't schedule the Texases and the Alabamas, or
I think they still would, because there's less of a risk for playing those
right. Okay.
games.
I thought you said that you can kiss the regular season interesting games goodbye. No?
No, I just mean interesting from not necessarily in terms of opponent scheduling, but in terms of what are the stakes of each regular season games. Because you look at a regular season each year for Ohio State, it's typically 3 losses, 4 losses is kind of the floor for them, I think, in most years. And in a 2014 playoff, you're going to be in with 3 or 4 losses. So that to me is the changing dynamic for what this version of the expanded playoff would mean for the Buckeyes.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is interesting again because compared to the NFL, where, whatever, how many teams get in, is the regular season in the NFL when the Cleveland Browns play the San Diego, the LA Chargers, let's say, the Chargers Browns. Is that game less important to fans? Are they bored by that game? Uh, let's say a mid-season game or an early season game because they're already thinking about the playoffs and playoff implications. Not that much. So I guess for those who argue that it wouldn't impact the regular season, if you look at the NFL, every game's pretty important. Now, college is somewhat different because Ohio State playing Ball State, there's no parity. Like the NFL has some parity. You're not exactly sure what's going to happen in that game. Whereas, Ohio State versus Ball State, you pretty much know what's going to happen. Um, so, and so how is the regular season impacted? I still think it is. I really like your idea here that it's becomes its own entity. I guess my question is, from a fan base standpoint, is anybody going to care if it's its own entity? Like who's going to care if they win the Big Ten? I mean, today we are all about the playoff and national championships and that type of thing. So that, I think they'll try to spin it that our first goal is to win the Big Ten. Well, that's not the first goal of the fan base. Now beating Michigan, that's still going to be there. But even then, it's like especially younger fans are going to be, well, yeah, that hurt, but you know, we've proved in 2024 we can lose to Michigan and win a national title, so it's not the end of the world. The whole idea of losing to Michigan as being the end of the world is gradually going to go away, and one could argue that's healthy. I'm not sure it's great for the rivalry and the intensity of the rivalry, but to put your whole life on one game and whether you're ruined for a week, that's probably not real healthy, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that game is again going to be probably an entity unto itself because you're rarely going to have an instance where you need to beat Michigan to make the playoff. Because you'll likely go into that last week of the regular season already on track to make the field. So if you're Ohio State, you're playing for seeding a little bit, which I guess matters because in a 24 team structure, the top 8 teams would get a first round bye. But for the most part, you're playing that game because you want to have bragging rights and a pair of gold pants.
Yeah, and the other thing is you're playing that game, at least now, you're playing that game to make it to the Big Ten championship game, which if you win the Big Ten championship game, you go to the Rose Bowl, correct? So they're going to remove championship games. And so that just throws the whole thing into the flux. It used to be if you beat Michigan, you're going to the Rose Bowl. And that's when the Rose Bowl was the granddaddy and, all that mattered. We've used this analogy. It's like the 3 networks on TV versus cable. That's kind of what's happened to the Rose Bowl. The Rose Bowl used to be, CBS. And now it's still CBS, but no one cares if it's CBS as much.
Yeah, and then, some of the finer details of this format will probably get ironed out if it ultimately is adopted because there are other layers to the discussion is how many games are played on campus? When would you actually start going to bowl sites? And that's a little unclear to me at this point. Because even if you are a top 8 seed, I believe you might get a home playoff game in that opening round, but maybe when you get to the Elite Eight or the quarterfinals, maybe then they start moving to bowl sites, or maybe they don't go with that format. Maybe they give them another home game. It sort of remains to be seen, but the qualification is just going to be totally different because you could be an 8-4 team and be and that's sort of the floor for Ohio State. I mean, the only scenario where you kind of can envision an Ohio State team that struggles to make the playoff would be if some hypothetical future year in which Ryan Day has left the program with a first-year head coach and half the roster left, and it's sort of like Jim Tressel in 2001, where you're barely above 500 trying to make the playoff. Because when the Buckeyes have been operational and the midpoint of a coach's tenure, they're typically at that 9-10 win mark year in and year out. So you're not looking at each season thinking, is Ohio State going to make the playoff in a 24 team structure? And that to me is different from how it is now, because I think they will make the playoff this year in 2026, even with this difficult schedule, and it's going to be a gauntlet and all that. And we've certainly discussed that. But you don't take it for granted, I think, in the same way you would for a 24 team playoff. I think most people would go into a season just with that assumption, and it probably would be proven right.
Yeah, the other element to this, I know Mike Greenberg on ESPN raised this point and got shot down, and I think he is wrong, but maybe not 100% wrong. Was this idea of the rivalry games? We'll just use Ohio State, Michigan. Let's say there's not as much on the line, or there's nothing on the line really with playoff implications, or even, Big Ten championship game implications. I guess the Big Ten champion would just be based on what regular season, and then they'd have
Regular season record and some convoluted or conference record and tiebreaker scenarios, I guess.
Right. So let's say you come to the Michigan game and it's meaningless other than it being a rivalry. Do players sit out? I think it's a stretch to think that coaches would sit players in the Ohio State Michigan game, because if you are heavily favored or you lose that game, it's still a major loss. There's still enough of Buckeye Nation that would just go berserk if you lose that game. So if you decide to sit players to save them and rest them for the playoff, which is, quote, more important, and you lose, you're in trouble. Now, the question becomes whether the player opts to sit to save his body, and this isn't that important, and the playoff is where I'm going to make my money, which I think the Ohio State Michigan game is so televised and so huge that it exists as a playoff game in terms of what you do in that game. Impressing scouts is a big deal. So I don't really see either of those happening likely, but never say never. I mean, I never thought I'd see guys sit out bowl games, and that started probably about 15 years ago, of guys just sitting out, quote, meaningless bowl games. So what becomes meaningless?
Right. I mean, if you were a child of the 70s, it would probably be hard to imagine Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson sitting out the Rose Bowl as they did at the end of the 2021.
Correct. So in 15 years, who knows, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the Michigan game, I do think the stakes of that game still are so high, because you look at this past year, it was a situation where Jeremiah Smith had a quad strain, had missed the previous weeks, and Carnell Tate was dealing with an injury as well. Ohio State was 11-0. They didn't need to be Michigan last year to make the college football playoff, but those guys both came back after missing most of them ever to play in that game. So to me, we already have an example of the Michigan game not being a determinant for Ohio State's selection in the playoff, and yet two players came back after missing previous weeks and really pushed themselves to the limit to be able to play in that game. So I think the stakes matter so much, and I think the fan base dictates sort of what expectations are to a large degree, because honestly, let's face it, I think Ohio State players and coaches wanted to win that game to get less crap from the base.
Right.
So that to me is creates a level of expectation, and the pressure to win that game and the social media cycle. I think that has a lot of influence on what matters. And I don't think the fan base views bowl games in that same way. And I don't think the expectation with Michigan would change.
I agree. That's why I think Greenberg's
Yeah.
wrong when it comes to Ohio State, Michigan. Now, let's take it outside Ohio State, Michigan, and Alabama. I think they play Auburn in the. I mean, do they play that in their final game? Let's take a big.
The Iron Bowl.
Let's take a
Alabama.
big. Let's
That's
take a big.
Iron Bowl's Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, let's take a big game and a big a football factory school that doesn't play their rival in the last regular season game.
Mhm. Penn State.
Yeah, let's say Penn State, right? Do they sit guys in their regular season finale if they, are in the playoff when it's not a rivalry game? Is that like, hey, you know what, this is take a bye week. That's where it gets interesting. I can see that I agree Ohio State, Michigan, it likely would not happen. But for all those teams out there that are playoff bound, who don't play super rivals in the final game, I can see guys resting. Oh, I got a nagging injury. Oh, I had a I tweaked my ankle in practice this week. There's ways around just saying that the guy's going to rest.
Right. I mean, that's always the gray area with this stuff because it's not as if you see a player who's just all of a sudden on the list. It's usually, oh, I had this minor thing I'm dealing with that I'm going to sit out. But most college football teams do play rivals at the end of the last week of the
They
regular season.
do.
I mean, I'm thinking Michigan State, Penn State, because Michigan State's Michigan game is typically in October, and Penn State doesn't have a rival in the Big Ten. Maybe Notre Dame, which is not scheduled to play USC some seasons late in the year, would be a case where their late season, their last game of the regular season is not always a rivalry game, but
What
most
about what's Texas? Do they play in A&M in the last one?
now they do, yeah.
Because Oklahoma is their big rival, and
Right, but A&M is still a rival for them.
Florida. Do they play Florida State in the final? I don't think so.
Typically, yeah.
Do they?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's mostly the last game.
I think
Does that change? We're going to start scheduling a rivalry game a little
yeah.
earlier so that we can rest guys in that last regular season game. I mean, these are all like hypotheticals, unlikely, but again, if it's moving more toward the NFL, and the NFL definitely guys sit out, the last game
Yeah, you just
before.
don't have the rivalry implications the way you do in college. And in terms of the interest of coaches and self-preservation, rivalry stakes mean a lot for their local fan base's approval rating. So in that sense, the political ramifications of resting starter, not taking a rivalry seriously, I think would sort of doom them, and I think would ultimately sort of render the whole point moot. I think to me, with the games that suffer are more you have an October game against Iowa, you have a November game against Minnesota or Rutgers. You see those, and we already see it in the 12 team era, but those just have lessened the stakes, I think, for that reason.
Yeah, well, I
I
would
mean,
agree. Unless NIL, unless all these teams can become the next Indiana and those games are actually competitive, but neither of us probably foresee that in terms of cross the board in the Big Ten. You're always going to have the haves and the have-nots, and it's the way. Let's not fool anybody. This is the way it's always been. This is not some new thing. I mean, in the 1970s, it was the big two and the little eight. I mean, everybody says, oh, these games are meaningless. I remember just Ohio State just throttling Wisconsin and throttling Northwestern. I mean, you're talking like 70 to whatever, and just name your score. So this is nothing new. But back to the 24. Are you in favor of the 24 or not?
I don't know. I'm still making up my mind. The thing I'm having a hard time with this whole expansion thing is just how fast it's happened. To me, we've only had 2 years of the 12 team playoff. I wouldn't mind seen sort of just how it evolves and impacts the sports. We've had so much change in college football. And I think even with the postseason structure, you look at it, college football had 145 years where it had no playoff. In 2014, it puts in a playoff. After 10 years, they decided to double the field from or not double, triple the size of the field from 12. So they had 10 years of a 14 playoff, and then maybe after 3 years of a playoff at 12 teams, they could expand. So just the amount of change that has happened so fast, I think, is just a lot. And I think it's important to have some continuity with the structure. And if you're trying to have a wider, dedicated fan base who follows the sport, I think constantly changing things don't always help. I think you need to establish some rhythms and traditions and all that. I think a positive element to expansion would mean you get more meaningful postseason for more teams. Maybe I mean that's an argument where I mean the old bowl system you used to care a lot about the Holiday Bowl or the Outback Bowl, and so more playoff games will be fun, but there is a risk of devaluing the regular season. To me, I guess I quibble less with the format versus just the speed of change.
Yeah, interesting.
Like it feels
Well,
like we're still trying to wrap our mind around the 12-team playoff and how that affects things and how you should schedule based off the 12-team playoff. I mean, how do you feel about this?
well, I think we live in a microwave society now. I just think everything's faster and speeds up. So I don't disagree that, go 5 years with the 12 team and what's the rush? But the rush is everything's a rush now. Everybody's in a rush, everything's instant, everything's scrolling through your phone like as fast as you can. I think just there's patience is a lost virtue. And um, I think it is good that more teams will get a chance. I talked to John Lumpkin, former Ohio State tight end. He did have a good point. He's like, okay, and I think he was talking more about the expansion of the basketball tournament, but it sort of applies to football a little bit. No, it was football because he talked about who got in? James Madison. James Madison got in the tournament. They got in the
Yeah.
playoff last year.
Yeah.
And everyone complained because they got drilled. Well, Lumpkin's point is okay, so you're going to let the sixth best Big Ten team in, or the fifth, the seventh best Big Ten team in a 24 team tournament potentially, or something like that. They're going to get drilled too. They got drilled in the regular season. They're going to get drilled in the playoff. You know, a James Madison isn't necessarily a lesser team than a mid Big Ten team. We could argue that, but so really that point of it kind of doesn't hold water for me. I do think more opportunity, and if you're going to step back and just as a fan, I think the playoff is just going to be exciting TV. I mean, it's going to be would you rather what are you going to be more interested in a home playoff game, even in a 2014 format, or playing Rutgers 2 weeks before Michigan? There's no question. It will be interesting, the ratings. It will test the regular season TV ratings, perhaps, if there's just not as much on the line for an Ohio State Minnesota game, let's say. Uh, I don't know. I think it's TBD, but I can see the positive negatives of both. I don't like that ultimately the Ohio State Michigan game will be watered down is way too strong. It's always going to be special, but it's a little bit like you don't even see it coming. It will tiny bit over time will become less relevant. Maybe relevant's the word, not less passionate, but less relevant, which is already there, as you pointed out. But I don't really like that. I like everything being on the line in Ohio State, Michigan. Loser, ruin season, not just because you lost the rivalry game, but it affects your postseason. And now it won't.
Yeah, and I think it's probably been a forever change after 2024, where Ohio State won a national championship without beating Michigan. That used to be a precondition. I think that ship has sailed in some ways.
Right.
But even last year, Michigan probably had a chance to sneak into the playoff, but it somehow upset Ohio State, and they were on the cut line. So just the cut line getting lowered and lowered, I think, will create fewer and fewer instances where you really do need to actually win for purposes of playoff seeding. To me, the thing that it's important probably to keep in mind too is once they expand, they're not going to ever reduce the field. You're not going to get so once they go to 24, there's no going back, and there is a point of no return because you've seen expansion, and so like men's basketball has come, Major League Baseball playoffs have expanded, NBA added to play-in games, NFL's expanded. There's no going back once you do this. Once you do this, because the money becomes baked in. You make more money, and then you spend more money because you've made more money, and so some of your costs become fixed, and you rely on that revenue. So once they move to 24, they're never gonna put the toothpaste back in the tube. So that to me, I think when I think about the speed of this is all happening, is something that you should be a little careful of. And I think they seem to just be kind of barreling ahead. But I also see some of the arguments because look, I remember watching Illinois, Tennessee, and the Music City Bowl was on in the media hospitality suite ahead of the Cotton Bowl last year when we were in down there in Texas. That game's more probably compelling if it's a first round playoff game. I wasn't really glued to the television watching Illinois pull that one out, but if it's a first round game, I think it's a little more gripping of a matchup. So I mean, the college football postseason used to be fun when the bowl game kind of meant something, and maybe you would have a larger postseason which was meaningful. So I see the argument, but it just, man, they're moving fast for a sport that's historically not moved very fast.
Right. And I think NIL has further, dampened, cut into the importance of the quote lesser bowl games. I mean, I think guys 50 years ago were excited to go to bowl games as sort of a treat. First of all, the world was larger, and wow, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, that was like an exotic place. That's not as exotic as it was now with social media and all that. So you got guys, star players who aren't going to play in those bowl games, but if it's a playoff game, they will. So you are gonna, it does put a little more pressure on guys trying to sit out a bowl game for their, draft status if it's a playoff game. I think that does matter. First of all, that sends a bad message, right, to NFL. This guy isn't a team guy. He's looking out for himself. They're in the playoff and he's not even playing versus if it's the Wobegon Bowl. Uh, the guy might sit out. And the other thing, real quick, is that it just popped into my head is I don't know if this will happen or not because one of my pet peeves is, coaches, playing their starters when they're up by 30 points, into almost to the fourth quarter because you have to win that game. Ryan Day always says, and in Ohio State, it is true. You can't lose a game. Well, now you can lose a game a little bit. Now you don't want to lose a game. So do you pull Julian Sayin a little quicker and put in the backup because when you're up by 30, well, if we lose the game, we're still in the playoff. Coaches don't think that way. I'm just saying it's an intriguing idea for me to think that you might actually see the backup quarterback in before, with more than 2 minutes left in the game, up by 30.
Do you think that's your pet peeve because you're really invested in the backups getting time and preserving the health of the starters, or you just want the game to sort of be on the on the ending and give
That's a
pull the
that's a
starters
fair.
out, their stats become fixed, you can plug that into your story and just really start typing without the need to watch as closely. You can pivot to riding in the fourth quarter.
I feel the bus wheel marks on my back here, getting thrown under the bus here by one Joseph
No, I'm just giving people a peek inside the.
Yeah, well, I think for me at that point it doesn't really matter. I think it's just something that it's it's probably is a bit of a pet peeve in that I mean I don't have any stake in the game, but I think that it's a risk thing. And why do I care if there's risk? Well, I don't know why I care if there's risk, but if you keep the quarterback, and we've talked about this in past episodes, I mean they kept Justin Fields in, he got hurt. Um, so to answer your question, both and there's a little bit of just you just want something done. It's nonsensical to me. It's illogical to risk your starting quarterback when the game's out of reach. That's there. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that does it for our purposes as where things stand with the 2014 playoff and how it could impact Ohio State. It's 2026 will be a 12-team playoff. We'll see if it's the last of its kind or if they'll sort of be at a stalemate in coming in future years. But that's sort of how things could continue to change in college football. There's never a dull moment in this era.
Joey, you had some news today just before we sign off. People might be interested in kickoff times.
Kickoff times. If they open against Ball State will not be a big noon kickoff. It will be a 12:30 kickoff, and then the big noon kickoff will be week 3 against Kent State. So that's where things stand with some kickoff time. Seasons get a little closer. We're recording this on May 28th, which is officially 100 days away from the first Ohio State football game in 2026.
Well done.
That was Rob Oller. I'm Joey Kaufman. Thanks for